it will evolve and grow, and as our town does, and there's a need for that. But I think it's probably best at this point to either move down to a 5 or continue with 7 and bring someone else on the first of the year when we start making appointments, and remove the first selectman, because they're off and running now. And frankly, I don't need to be part of that, or whoever is first selectman doesn't need to be part of that in that mix. He or she should be an ex officio to the police commission. And I think that's very important, that the first selectman is part of the police commission through ex officio, but not a voting member. I think at this point, having a vote here and a vote on the police commission when dealing with funding and everything else got a little sticky. I'd rather the police commission develop a budget, bring it to the first selectman, than me being part of the budget and influencing it. And that was part of the stickiness. We worked through it and amicably, but I think it's time now to launch that without the first selectman's influence by vote. So I wanted to put that up for discussion tonight. We're not voting on it, obviously. To change an ordinance, we have to go to public hearing and have and all that. But I did want to have that conversation, and how you felt about that and what you've heard.
I'm very much in agreement with it. I mean, you'll be, the first selectman will still be ex officio, and I still think there needs to probably be a little smoother to make sure that the first selectman is still in an administrative loop. Because the police chief, regardless of whether the first selectman is a member or just ex officio or just the first selectman, you're still going to have almost a daily encounter with the police department and the police chief. It just goes hand in hand. Right. Because I think, I did some research on this back a couple years ago, and I think Waterford was probably the only town I could find in the state where the first selectman was a member. I do think it was a good idea from the start to get those first couple of years going, and we've gotten into it. And pretty much every place, the first selectman or mayor is ex officio. They still have a lot to do with when they talk about the hiring of a police chief and so forth like that. And anytime there's a major event, they're still obviously involved. But I think it's a good point, especially when you talk about funding and stuff like that. If we need to grow the police department, we've pointed out several times that towns of our size have anywhere from 10 to 15 more police officers than we do. I think it'd be better that the commission develops that and then brings it to the board without the first selectman having been part of that solution as a member of the commission. I still think leaving it at 7 isn't a bad idea. And I know there's plenty of people that would love the opportunity to serve in the town on that. So I'd be very supportive of removing the first selectman from the police commission, with the first of the year or whenever. Yeah.
Thank you, and I think 7's the right number too. I don't want to say it dilutes the power, but it gives a variety of opinion, and frankly, it's been a little tough to get quorum sometimes, so I think 7 makes it easier to get a quorum. Grabbing 4 people out of 7 is...
Is there an ex officio right now to the commission? No. Okay,
right,
so there are 7 members, one of which is the first selectman, who is a voting member.
Voting member.
So what that would do is you would appoint another member that would be a voting member, and then the first selectman's role would be ex officio only.
Correct.
So there'd still be 8 people available to discuss things. But
part of the discussion, as you well represent us ex officio in your commissions, I'll be part of the conversation, but not a voting member, which probably is more appropriate. Again, especially because they're off and running. Part of the scary part of going down this road of going independent was, the urban legend of police commissions are powerful and they, watch the spending get out of control and they create empires and all that. I don't think that's the case in small towns. I've talked to first selectmen and mayors across the state through my CCM meetings and organization and other meetings as well. I don't see it happening. I think it's more big city stuff where the police commission does tend to wield a lot of power. But in our case, I think it would be for a smoother transaction. I'm okay with it. The police commission is okay with it as well. And just wanted to bring it to your attention before I just kind of threw this ordinance change in front of you without a discussion first.
So I think Kevin made a good point with if the police commission does want to recommend hiring officers, that would be wouldn't have the first selectman influence on that. So I think that was a good point. The 7 I'm fine with. When we first appointed people, we had a lot of interest, a lot more than 7 that applied. So this seems to be one of the boards that does generate interest in people serving. So I'm okay with that.
Okay, so I'll carry forward. If I'm seeing a lot of nods, Mrs. Hardy, you okay?
I have to give it some more thought.
Okay.
It's just on the agenda for the first time
Yes,
tonight. I need
sure.
to give it more consideration.
Digest.
Okay, and you'll have plenty of time to do that as we go, and I'll form a revision or amendment to our ordinance and bring it forward to review, and then schedule a public hearing, I guess, or do we need to review it? Can I schedule a public hearing if I'm just changing the first selectman to 7? Or would you like me to wait, Mrs. Hardy, until you weigh in?
I think I'd like to wait till the next
Okay.
meeting.
Okay.
We also will have to have, if we're going to do an ordinance, we're going to have, we'll have legal expenses.
Yeah, because we have to publish at least the amendment to the
Follow the
ordinance.
procedure.
So, yeah, I'll come back and then we'll decide to schedule a public meeting, and I'll have the legal, I'll have the, if it isn't in here already, no, we haven't done it yet, I'll have the amendment to the ordinance prepared. Okay, thank you for indulging me on that. Ex officio reports, Mr. Daigle?
I only have, the only meeting I've had since our last meeting is with the Public Safety Building Vision Committee. We were presented last week, the 2 concepts as well as the needs assessment that was conducted by the architectural firm. We are meeting again next week to address that, those concepts, to determine, one, validate the needs, size of individual offices and so on and so forth, and get some feedback back on some preliminary, and I want to stress preliminary, rough order of magnitude costs associated with one of the concepts to get a better understanding for those costs, so that we can, before we authorize the detailed design work, the full vision committee can understand where we're at, where we're going, and how we can make a functional building while we still remain within budget that's been authorized by the citizens of East Lyme.
Right. I'll have more on that in a little bit. That's all your
Yes,
your
sir.
report? You want to talk about the forum from the Brian Daigle Foundation the other evening?
Yeah, was it, today's Wednesday, right? It was last evening, was it?
Oh, yeah,
Monday.
I guess
Yeah,
it
it was
was.
last evening. We held our 6th annual
Monday.
public forum on mental health and suicide education and prevention at East Lyme High School. We had 3 panel members, 2 who were suicide loss survivors who lost both. One lost a sister, one lost a brother, and then we also had a representative from the East Waterford Youth and Family Services. It was a very good discussion, good participation by the audience, and I only would encourage more participations going forward. You know, mental health and its treatment, and it's such an important thing, and it affects every community in this country. It affects, if not you, it affects someone you know, and it's a crisis, whether people lead to self-medication to deal with their anguish, or whatever the case may, and potentially, if not properly treated, it can end up in a suicide, which takes someone's life. It is preventable with treatment, and we're just trying to get that word out there and the communication out there. And the more people who are involved, the more people who talk about mental health and suicide prevention, all we have to do is save one person, and it's worth every minute of our time and effort. So, going forward for next year, we want to work with the schools a little bit more, get some more. We had maybe 2 or 3 students there last night. We've had a couple students in the past, but I really think we can do a better job interacting with some of the groups at the high school to get better participation, because it's all about education, understanding what resources are out there, so that people can take advantage of them and not struggle with their issues on their own.
Your group, your organization that you're a part of, co-founder of, is enormously important to our town, and you've given us an opportunity to talk about it. And that's half the battle, is to be able to talk about it and not have it be hidden. And I appreciate all the work you do. I attended. It was the panelists were wonderful, and I think it was very, very educational for the people in the audience.
Thank you.
Mr. Cunningham?
Let's see, well, last night I attended the Historic Properties Commission. One of the things that's coming up for, not necessarily for historic properties, but for the Brookside Farm, they're having a program, I think I mentioned it last time, on Columbus Day. There'll be a nice program there, and might be a place to bring the kids and adults too. So that's something to look forward to coming up. The other thing is that they're working on is there is a list of homes that are historic properties in town, and they're trying to come up with a design for a plaque. If you've been to some other towns where they have historic homes, they have a little plaque that you can affix to the house, and so they're looking at the various designs that are used in other towns and trying to come up with something that might be appropriate for East Lyme. Maybe incorporate the scallop shell, and make it available. Try to get a price discount for those that are interested to put that on their historic home. Come up with a design that's consistent and throughout the town, and maybe get a little price break. So they're working on that. So I think that'll be interesting and maybe attractive to a number of people.
Great. Mr. Salerno?
Do they have an idea of how many houses that would qualify for that?
You know, we have a book with a list, and I didn't want to throw a number out there.
Okay.
But,
It's significant. I mean,
yeah,
No,
a couple
it's-
hundred. Yeah.
I've been,
I think 1890 is the cutoff.
No, I think that's great. Mystic does a good job with that. There's plenty
I
of
just miss it.
houses, I think.
My office.
That's great. I'll just add, I was at planning last night. They had the night without a public hearing or something, so they spent a lot of time in the POCD.
Okay.
And the big topic was a survey. They're trying to do a survey around town to try to get feedback, what residents feel about certain topics, what they'd like to see improved, very general. Again, I mentioned before, this has to be done by 2020, at the end of next year, as required by the state. They got a great group doing it. They're looking to possibly, it's going to be an online survey, probably around 10 questions. They were discussing the questions yesterday. They're refining it. They would like to bring it to you, Mark, for approval before it goes out. There was discussion of whether they could go to the polling place and have people do it there, or possibly hand out a card. Roseanne and I were there, and we talked through there's some complications with that. You have to get state approval from the Elections Commission. So she was going to talk. I think the chair was going to talk today to one of the registers to find out about that. If it doesn't go there, then it will be an online survey, and they're talking about ways to reach different people via social media, via library, commission agent, and such. So that's what's going on there. What I heard a lot today kind of ties in with a lot of the discussions they've been having, so I thought that was good. The only other thing is they have a walkability subcommittee, and they're coming up with areas where there's lack of sidewalks or where sidewalks are not being connected. So they have a list, and they hope to kind of prioritize that. And I recommend that they reach out to Public Works.
Yeah, it's already been done. They should.
Yeah, I think there's been some work done in the police commission maybe to put together a final thing. They'd like to add that to the POCD. So anyways, that's what I have.
Thanks. I'll get. Or the next time you're in there, next time you're over, that's planning, right?
Yeah.
Just point out that we've done all that. We have a sidewalk survey that's been completed by Public Works and been identified. So maybe we can tie in work that's already been done.
Absolutely.
Instead of them trying to create or recreate. I'm surprised that came up, but I'll try to put them together.
It's been a subcommittee that's been going
I
on for
know.
a couple of years. This has been on the back burner.
Okay.
Yep.
Just a comment on that.
Yeah.
Well, I was on the planning commission when we did the update for 2010. I recollect that we did a survey was done at that time too, and I don't know if there's any value in comparing some of those questions to what they plan on putting out this time?
They discussed them, yes.
It can get you, trends. As
Yes.
compared to what people thought were a priority 10 years ago as compared to what they think it may be today.
Yep.
Not that they all have to be identical, but there could be some commonality that worth
Yeah,
using.
I think they talked about it, and I think they started with that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so that's a good comment.
Thank you. Mrs. Hardy?
Okay, last month was my month for Board of Ed. I reported on the first meeting. The second meeting, they had moved the meeting to 6 o'clock, and I wasn't aware that they had done that. So I guess they did that on Monday morning or Saturday, and I was out of town, so I wasn't aware of that until I showed up a few minutes before 7. So they had moved that so that they could have a committee of the whole, which they have frequently, to discuss goals and things, and I did not stay for that. So I don't know who's on for October, but you may want to look at the minutes from September meeting. I'm not even sure they take minutes at those committee of the whole meetings. Did they
I
have
don't know
those
what
when
the
you were chair?
rules are.
No,
Okay.
not at all.
I don't know what the
We would
rules are.
we'd occasionally have a board retreat just to talk about goals, but not a committee of
So
the
I
whole.
would suggest that, who has October, by the way?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Oh.
I don't
I
remember.
think
Okay.
it's, I'm November, I believe.
No, I'm November.
It might be me.
If you're November,
January.
because I
I
thought it
don't
was
know,
May
you
and
make me
November.
always
If
go
it's
for you
me,
anyway.
Sandy, it should be on my schedule. It's me.
That's okay, I should have looked at it today before I left.
You get January and July.
But somebody, whoever's going should probably review what actually happened there, but as I said, I'm not sure that they take notes during that. It's kind of an unofficial meeting.
You owe me some meetings anyway, so you can go.
It's Kevin?
Okay. I thought I had November.
I might go for you next week or whatever.
Okay.
Because I have something to bring in front to the Board of Ed.
Okay.
Fortunately, you already heard from the Commission on Aging tonight and Natural Resources, so that takes care of that.
Okay.
And then zoning, the main item was the cell tower that had been proposed for amateur
Ham radio.
ham radio, and according to the testimony that was given, there are no cell towers for this purpose within a 50 or 60 mile radius. And so that was the argument, that there was a need for this and that there were many operators in the area who would utilize it. It was stated that there would not be any commercial rental on the tower. And so that was the second time that the proposal had come before zoning, and in a tie vote, it was defeated for the second time. Those people who voted against it felt that this was a devaluation of the adjoining property owners. Although the day that the balloon was floated to see how visible the tower would be, whoever was on the committee to observe said that they could not see the balloon. However, the 3 people who voted against felt that it was still a detriment to the neighborhood. The other people who voted for it felt that this was something that served a public need. There were people that were interested in it, and the fact that you couldn't see the balloon indicated that after the tower was erected, that in a very short time people wouldn't even notice it. So I have no idea whether the proponent of that tower will return for a third time or not.
He's appealing. An appeal has been filed,
Okay,
so we'll go to appellate court.
all right. Thank you. And just for upcoming, I believe that the Natural Resources Commission will be making a report on their water study at the next meeting of the Aquifer Commission, and I have to confirm that meeting date, and when I do, I will have Sandy send that out in case anyone wishes to attend that. And we can decide if we want them to come later to make a presentation to us, or just have a summation of what was presented to the Aquifer Committee. Also on the agenda for the next meeting, I had requested that we have a report from the Historic Cemetery Commission, and they are working on that, and I will confirm that with Sandy also for the next meeting. And that's it.
Mrs. Hardy, I think we should have this water presentation either at the Aquifer thing and double up and go to their meeting, or have it here. I don't think we should do it twice.
We could do that, or we could have just a couple of people attend and report back to the board, whichever we prefer. We'll have to decide that because we'll have to post 2 agendas
Right.
if we have a
Indeed.
quorum.
Indeed. So,
Why
you know,
don't we do it this way? I certainly will be there, maybe somebody else will go with me. We'll report back to the board, and if the board feels that they want a full report, we can schedule it.
Okay.
Otherwise, we just give a summation.
Okay.
And you will have copies of the water report.
Terrific. Let me know when that is. I'd like to go to.
Okay.
I'd go with you.
All right.
Mr. Siri?
Youth Services has not met since our last meeting, neither has Parks and Rec. They'll be coming up. But this afternoon, because of the Triple E, which I know you'll talk about shortly, both the 2 Waterford soccer games with Waterford were moved up today. It's the ALS Challenge, which we've done for several years, and the boys played at 1:30, the girls at 3:45, and the trophies will reside in East Lyme for this upcoming year. The boys won 2-1, and the girls won 5-1. So the ALS trophy for the competition will be here, and it's also, they've raised quite a bit of money for ALS research and so forth like that. So that's it.
Yes, we lost a dear person in our town, Patricia Shaw. We lost her to the Triple E virus. It was probably the first loss in the state of Connecticut for a whole long time, and that made a lot of news. She was loved by many, including her church group down at St. Matthias, where she and her husband served for years. My condolences to the family. We took this very seriously when we heard about it. It has grown as a news item. Yet the threat has lessened, but we haven't really put that out there. I guess what I need to say is I've been in conference calls and in meetings at least twice a week for probably the last 3 weeks since we've met last, with Department of Public Health, CDC, Ledgelight, and all these experts in the business. This took them by surprise. They weren't ready for this. Generally, they just like the flu bug. You kind of know what flu strain you're going to get, and you get the flu shot according to the flu strain. They usually know when this is coming, and they had no idea it was coming. By the time they figured out it was here, the population of mosquitoes was declining, and it's at a point now where spraying would do no good. You'd have to hit this mosquito in flight or on a leaf to knock it down, and there's not enough mosquitoes to make any significant difference. There's still a threat, but the cost of this, and you would do street spraying. You can't do aerial spraying at this point in time, but street spraying, and you'd be going down the street spraying, and really the mosquitoes are living out in the backyard and in the woods and in the swamp behind there and in the forest, and you're not hitting them. You're not getting them. You can't get them, and the area is too vast. We went on video this week and upped our game as far as our messaging goes. We put it all over our Facebook pages and our town website. The state did as well, and I think the news teams around the state had done a great job as well. Of asking people to take some personal responsibility in wearing long sleeves, long pants, socks, hats, in the evening hours especially. The human biting mosquitoes that typically carry there's like 30 types of mosquitoes. The human biting type that do carry the Triple E are typically night mosquitoes, and during the day they hide. And there's daytime mosquitoes that don't burn up, and those typically don't have Triple E. There's no de facto. There are exceptions. It's never a zero. The mosquito population has declined significantly over the last couple of weeks. In fact, they're having trouble catching enough mosquitoes in the traps to even test. at this point. We're having cold nights now. Today was balmy and warm, but no new mosquitoes are hatching. So when you see a warm couple of days, you don't think that, oh, here comes another wave of mosquitoes. They're not breeding now. They don't breed this time of year. They're in a state now where they transform into or evolve into a more of a hibernation stage. They're not even biting that much, but it's not a zero. The threat is not gone. So we're not putting the word out to it that it's okay, everybody go outside again. We still want to put that personal responsibility message on there. We still want to keep youth sports from being performed and playing past 5:30. Youth, you know, it was the football games and the soccer games and all that at the high school, but it's also the youth sports. It's also fall ball, and it's all those other things, afternoon activities into the early evening hours that we got the message out on. So it is what it is. It's a beautiful time of year, but this is also a deadly threat. And Mrs. Shaw, one of our citizens, passed away because of it. They then went back, of course we heard about the person with old Lyme, they went back and checked the testing of people who had already died. I think there's a couple other people that they've then determined that, oh, that really wasn't pneumonia that person died from, it was triple E, when they went back and tested for triple E. So I think the reports now are that 4 people have died from triple E in the state of Connecticut, and there's a couple others that are sick. Are there any questions on that? The state has put out a frequently asked question, a FAQ brief. I'll forward that to you tomorrow, just so you're up to date on it. I've gotten calls, how come you're not spraying? And that's the answer. Yeah, but other towns are spraying, and you know, on the conference calls, the experts are saying, yeah, they're spraying almost as a panacea, not as a fix. You can't go spray the ball field and then have sports. You're still going to keep the kids off the field, because you may not have gotten that one mosquito that was hiding underneath the leaf, didn't get the spray on it, and is out now roaming and potentially biting. So that's that, and that's taken up a majority of, well, news coverage, but discussions in my life.
Mark, question?
Yes, sir.
When does the threat end? I know, I've heard frost. I know this Friday night we have a low of 41 degrees projected, but if we have a frost, is that?
The hard frost is the definitive, and then there's
If it warms up
and
after
then
a
there's the
frost?
mosquito that comes in on your off your dog, just before that frost, and is in your house.
Not
And
suffering.
so there's never a zero. And there's these mosquitoes actually hibernate during the summer, during the winter. They don't just die off and suddenly there's no mosquitoes on the planet. They're hibernating. Many die off. There's a few that hibernate and then will come back up in the spring. So already we're talking about what we're going to do in the spring. Aerial spraying, maybe not. And certainly local spraying. We have to consider that in our town with the ball fields being close to, when you think about where the middle school is in proximity to Gordon Pond and the swamp behind there, and the woodsy area behind the high school and Flanders School, especially those areas. Less traps that were catching triple E were mostly inland and forested areas. Less I noticed on the shorelines. We weren't seeing it right on the shore. Not to say that means the boardwalk's safe. That's not to say that this playground at Niantic Center School is safe. But the trappings and the catching of the triple E seem to be on the back. So, inland. So there's that.
Can I ask you
Yes.
a question? So this issue with them hibernating over the winter and then coming back to life, so is that going